What's up? Welcome in. Hoge and Jahns back with you. Got a fun episode for you today with one of our longest friends on this podcast, Mark Potash, joining us. Johnsy, it's opening day.
Are you going?
Like you're just jacked for baseball. You did wear White Sox colors today. I appreciate that.
That was unintentional.
Yeah.
Very much unintentional. But you are going to the game, right? You are taking your son.
I am. Yeah, I took my I'm recording from CHGO Studios this morning, but I brought James down with me because they're on spring break, and we're gonna go to the game after the show later. So, I made that mistake last year, so I might as well do it again.
Is it a free hot dog day? What promotions have they run in the past? It's probably too early to make fun of the White Sox, but
it's never too early. I believe it's
take
free
your dog to the
free
game
tickets
day.
Just walk in the park, and to be honest, it's amazing. We don't have to go on a tangent about this, but if you go look right now on Ticketmaster, we're 5.5 hours from first pitch. Plenty of seats available, and yet they're all $100. What are you doing? Like, they probably get sold out, but they just jacked the ticket prices up for opening day. I get it, but there's this thing called supply and demand, and there's not enough demand.
It's not a bad day for baseball either.
No, it'll be good.
It's hoodie baseball weather.
Hoodie baseball weather. It's a good way to put it. This is still a football podcast, so we are going to talk football, and we're going to have a conversation with Mark Potash, who I'm sure most Bears fans listening to the show have already heard the news that he took a buyout from the Chicago Sun-Times and is no longer working there. Last Friday was his last day. Yeah, that was last Friday, right? This week, I'm telling you, for whatever reason, this week feels like it's been 3 weeks. I don't know why. So he is, but he started his new website, markpotash.net. And so we're going to talk to him kind of about some career stuff, what's been going on, but also plenty of Bears conversation as well.
How closely are you tracking the pro days at this moment and where Ryan Poles is going, where Dennis Allen is Ben Johnson with Ryan Poles? Do you take note of all this?
I do. I mean, I take note. I think there's certain situations where it tends to matter a little bit more.
Like, for example, can I let me interject? So yesterday, there were 3 notable pro days: LSU, Boise State, and Ohio State. At Ohio State, you had Ryan Poles, Ben Johnson, and Dennis Allen. Well, Will Campbell, his arms were growing down in Baton Rouge, and Ashton Jeanty was, catching passes in Boise. What do you make of all that?
Well, and I believe Dan Ruchar the offensive line coach, went to the LSU pro day.
Correct.
Was Bieniemy in Boise?
I did not see him. I'm guessing he was.
I mean, you talk about drawing the short straw. You got to go to Idaho in March, but running back's a scout. I mean, you got to split up. This is not a new thing. They go through this all the time, and I think it is important to be there. But really, the biggest thing you get out of it, if you're Ryan Poles and Ben Johnson going in person, is usually the opportunity to meet with these guys in person. Obviously, the way the Bears did it with Caleb last year, sending the entire organization down there and having long, lengthy meetings that basically lasted all day. That was a unique situation.
And having dinner with them, I think everybody's thinking about that.
Right. So, no, I mean, I take note of where they're at. I don't necessarily put too much stock in, I guess, let me say, I don't think Ryan Poles choosing to go to Ohio State over Boise State doesn't, or means that they're not going to draft Ashton Jeanty, which
Correct.
You want to make fun of me for this morning.
I do, because you didn't like the idea of drafting Ashton Jeanty in a previous podcast on this channel. And then this morning I woke up and saw your mock draft 2.0. And who did you have the Bears taking at number 10?
I believe it was Ashton Jeanty.
Yes, same guy, unless there's 2 players with the same name who both happen to be outstanding at running the football.
Did you read the mock draft, though?
No, I just watched your mock draft.
Oh, okay.
The 11-minute video this morning.
Because in the written version, I did say I'm not totally in on this, but let's examine the scenario of if they go down this road and do draft Ash and Genty, what the overall picture might look like. However, I did bring up the fact in both the video and in the written piece, Johns, because I think this could be a real thing. Depending on how the board falls, should Genty fall to 10, that means other guys have been picked ahead of him, right? So
Yeah.
there is a world where you're sitting there at 10 and you're going, all right, even if our philosophy here is that this is too high for a running back, well, he's a unique running back to the point that he technically could be the best player available and also fit a significant need that you have. And those are the moments where I think you have to throw out the idea of, hey, this position matters more than this one. If there's a guy sitting there, regardless of who the player is, that checks both of those boxes, hey, he's the best player on our board and he fits a need, I think you got to draft him. And so there is a world, there is a scenario where I do see that playing out that way, which is why I think it's worth the discussion that we've had on this show and me going through that exercise in a mock draft as well.
So if you're the Bears and you want the running back, you want the best running back in the draft, who are you watching? The Raiders? And now apparently the Saints, because their running backs coach, according to Ashton Genty himself, I think, if I'm reading this right on Twitter, spent some time with him. They got to know each other a little bit. So their research is intensifying, and they have the 9th pick, I believe. So, which would lead us to the potential possibility of Will Campbell continuing to fall to number 10. I've warmed to the idea of the Bears' openness to taking an offensive tackle with less than ideal arm length. So my big board 2.0 came out today, and I was going through just offensive tackles taken by the Chiefs under Andy Reid, with Ryan Poles obviously there. And every single one of them, from Eric Fisher to, I'm blanking on the last guy taken by them, they all had arm length over 34 inches. Some of them had arm length over 35 inches.
Yeah.
But Ben Johnson's starting tackles in Detroit do not have that. They don't meet that threshold that the Chiefs apparently have of 34 inches. Taylor Decker, 33 and 3/4 inches. And then you have Penei Sewell, 33 1/4. So not hitting that 34 mark threshold, but still darn good tackles. Taylor Decker, in my research, like you go back in time in 2016, there was a question about his arm length coming out of Ohio State. He didn't meet the 34-inch mark for a lot of teams. But guess what? He's been their starting left tackle since then. That's a long time to be entrenched in one spot. And obviously, he was just part of one of the best offenses in the league in Detroit. So something to think about. Probably we're thinking about this too much, but we know NFL teams do the same. But this is Ben Johnson's reference point in Detroit.
It is, but I also think it's notable too that 2 years ago, Ryan Poles passed on Peter Skoronski when it was a similar conversation. The team that drafted him immediately moved him to guard.
Yes.
So,
but darn all right. Arm length shorter than 34 inches, but he surpassed 33. So maybe that mark for Poles is 33. Maybe that's where he breaks from Andy Reid and Brett Veach.
Well, remind me, did they grow to 33 yesterday? Did they, or are they still right below 33?
So like his Will Campbell's arm length grew by what, 1/4 of an inch to 33 inches, but his wingspan somehow decreased. It's the combine measurements that matter most. And look, all these teams will host these prospects, and I'm sure they'll measure him as well again.
Well, let's bring in a guest. I want to know his arm length. Mark Potash joins the show right now. We love having Potsy on. Potsy, what's your arm length? Do you fit the criteria that Ryan Poles is looking for in terms of arm?
I'm sure I don't, but I was just thinking that it's like March 27th, after free agency, but a month before the draft when we're talking about the arm length of offensive linemen. But that's where we are. This is kind of not for you guys, because I know you guys are into it, but it's kind of for anyone. When I was doing it, That was just kind of, to me, this kind of the dead period. But my only arm length, my favorite arm length story was the one time a GM, I can remember a GM actually had kind of admitting a mistake. You know how we never got an answer from, Ryan Pace on the Mitch Trubisky, or I didn't. I think Adam, you might have, but we never got, at least for the press conference, an answer. The one time I remember with doing that was with Phil Emery with Shea McClellan, and I remember being at the combine and say, what'd you get wrong? He said next time I'd get guys with a little longer arms, because he was a defensive end slash linebacker at Boise State, I think, and the arm length was a factor there. So that's my arm length story, but that's all I got.
What is your favorite Bears draft story? Hit, miss, like overdraft, like a Shea McClellan, who actually ended up winning a Super Bowl in New England. Was a pretty good player there for a year. But in your years of doing this, do you have like a favorite NFL draft story from the Bears?
No, I don't think there's a favorite. I remember when I was not covering the Bears, like I remember the strategy of Jim Finks when in 1975, all the stories in the Sun-Times, the Tribune, the Daily News were all about a running back named Hardman, Don Hardman, from Texas Tech or Texas something. And it was a total like deflection, a misdirection, because he was absolutely dead set on taking Walter Payton from Jackson State. And I remember brought that up to Pace at one point. I said, "Do you ever play that game? Do you ever, here's your chance to actually use the media for your misinformation." And actually, the funny thing is he said no. I remember he said no at the time, but I found that kind of ironic, because it was kind of a wayward story, but because his infatuation with the cloak and dagger thing is what got him into the Trubisky mistake, which was not letting anybody know. It was total secrecy. And so I would say the Trubisky one, I think, is the most memorable, because that draft, I can't remember what you guys did, but that draft, like how like in the paper we say, who would you draft? And I was like on some defensive lineman or something, and not even thinking quarterback, even though I was skeptical about having Mike Glennon. I remember asking at that press, does this preclude you from drafting a quarterback? So I was onto that, but for some reason I was not thinking that a team with a top 3 pick would not take a quarterback in a draft just because they took Mike Glennon. So I was disappointed upon reflection in that. But also that draft was interesting just because I think that was that's the indictment more than anything else of Ryan Pace, is not so much the actual pick of Trubisky, because it is a valid argument that Trubisky was to many people the top rated quarterback in that draft, but that he was so resolute about it. And again, that secrecy and just, not wanting to know, like he knew something everyone else didn't, that he traded up. He actually traded draft picks to get Trubisky, and kind of bidding against himself, instead of taking a chance that, if I don't get this guy, I'll settle for Patrick Mahomes. And we know by the analysis now and to me, that's the indictment, because anybody who analyzed quarterbacks in that draft, if you thought Trubisky, it's okay if you thought Trubisky was better. That's a mistake, people. But if you thought he was so much better than Mahomes and Watson that you couldn't take the chance on losing Trubisky, that's a fireable mistake. So that's my, when I think of the draft, that in the times I covered it, that's what I think.
But if I could back up,
drafts, frankly, were when I was covering the Blackhawks and not actually at the draft.
Well, I actually want to ask you about that at some point in this conversation, about covering hockey. But if I could just back up, did we just find out that you were to blame for him going cloak and dagger and drafting Trubisky because you told him about what went down with Walter Payton?
Oh, no. I don't think so. No, I think that was.
I think you put that into his head, and then he was like, "Oh."
I think that was just Ryan Pace's MO, and it's always interesting how when you have that, that's all. That's not an unusual tack. The Broncos took that tack with Cutler in 2006. They never brought him in. To me, that's very typical of Cutler, because I always say all the teams that acquired Jay Cutler never really got to know him. And even though Cutler ended up being the best quarterback in that draft, he wasn't a winning quarterback, and they missed out on some of the personality issues he had. The Bears did, because the Bears Angelo got him very quickly without really doing the homework they should have done, and realized that, he's a tough guy. I don't know how else to say it. Cutler's a tough guy to win with. He's just very easily annoyed. it's very difficult to be. It was difficult for him to be a good teammate, and nobody, even the Broncos, they did that cloak and dagger hide. They didn't even bring him in for a whatever was a 30 visit at that time, whatever it was called, and they really hid their interest. And the Bears didn't hide their interest. The Bears just didn't have time to do the background. So it was interesting to me in the Cutler thing when it relates to things like cloak and dagger that all the teams that missed on him never really got to know. I don't say missed on him, but acquired him. Never really got to know him. And I can't remember what the subject was, but that's my Cutler story.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Mark, but when you and I were working together at the Sun-Times, when we were covering the Combine years ago, when Phil Emery was giving a press conference, it might have been the same one where he congratulated David Haw on the game, but David Haw wasn't there. I think it was that same press conference where you might have asked him about cloak and dagger tactics and smoke screens. Didn't you ask him about like lying at the Combine and how GMs tend to
that
cloud the truth?
It's funny you bring that up, Adam. That was actually Ted Thompson, the GM of the Packers, because one thing I loved, I hated. I was always very frustrated. I realized now it's been 10 years since I've gone to the Combine. I did not like the offseason. I'm not really good. That doesn't play to my strength. I'm really good when things happen, when there are games. So the offseason, not my thing. But the one offseason event I really enjoyed was the Combine, because at least when I was covering it, you had so much access to people. You had most GMs were there, most coaches were there, and then you could kind of sneak in on the double backs, which I used to do. And you can get, talking like 3-on-1 with Pete Carroll once and stuff like that, and getting some, to me, getting good background. And I always liked it. So one time I went to Ted, I was at the Packers one because it was the Packers. And, I asked Ted Thompson, I said, I think my question was, how do you balance your need for secrecy with your fans' thirst for information, which is always the paradox, the conflict of the Combine, of any offseason endeavor for these guys, that they're trying to be as secretive as they can. That's their MO anyway, especially in the offseason. Yet they were at a venue where fans are just dying for information. Everybody just wants to know what's going on. And I remember it was a funny answer, I thought, because he was saying that he could have been opposite guy, like on Seinfeld. And like, I'm one of the few people who, like, at that point never saw Seinfeld, so I didn't get the reference, because I was just busy at the time. When Seinfeld was on, I was working, so I didn't quite get it then. But but now I do. I've seen it enough to realize what that opposite guy was, and I actually use that a lot, because you see a lot of that all over the place. But anyway, so yeah, he said, I guess I could be like opposite guy and just say exactly the opposite of what I think. But I can't remember. It was a funny answer. I remember that. But that was the genesis of that story and that question.
Potsy, who is the how do I want to word this? Favorite coach, Bears coach that you've covered, like in the sense of just like whether that's helping you do your job or just entertaining, or the one that you felt like he was easiest to get along with.
Well, that's actually a hard question to answer, Adam, because the access today is so bad that it's hard to get to know anybody, and that's a big difference for me. I'll say Dave Wannstedt right off the bat, but one reason why Dave was a really good guy. And one thing I liked about Dave Wannstedt is like, he, had this image of this awful, that was back in the days where it was, and maybe it's still the same, where like the harder you worked at football and ignored everything else in the world, like the better your reputation was. That's just the way it was. Hardworking. The Dick Vermeil story, I think it was, about him sleeping on his couch. And you always hear those about other coaches. That was always a big thing. And that was Dave's persona. And I just felt like that wasn't his life. I just got the impression that really wasn't his life. I remember one time, it was like in 96 or 97, whatever the year the Marlins won the World Series. I was covering like a Friday press conference, and the Bears were scheduled to play the Dolphins, but the World Series was going on. So if the World Series had extended to Sunday, the Bears game against the Dolphins would have been pushed to Monday. And we asked Dave about it, and he says, blah, 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 blah. And I'm sure that Kevin Brown was pitching against for the Marlins, and if he clinched it, it would have been over. They would have played on Sunday. He says, and I'm sure Brown will get the job done. That was his closing. It was Dave feigning. I think he was purposely feigning knowledge of the outside world, that he knew who was pitching in the World Series, which was totally against his whole persona of knowing something other than football. And he was just trying to kind of show that he knew. But I think that was just an act. To me, Dave was much deeper than that. And I think people have seen that now that he's had kind of this resurrected career or whatever. But anyway, Dave made my choice. But I do want to make the point that there have been some good guys. Like I thought Matt Nagy was a really good guy. I never talked to Matt Nagy once one-on-one in 4 years. Part of that's because I wasn't very aggressive in doing that. I kind of lost interest in getting anything out of that kind of, but also because towards the end, the Bears, and even now, I think, and to this day, they either discourage that or they don't allow that as much. You really got to work hard. You guys know, because you guys have gotten Poles and Eberflus, I think, and you've gotten guys, but you got to be really much more aggressive. It was a much more casual thing to ask for a double back with like Vic Fangio or a coach or a head coach, and now we don't really get that access. So I didn't get to know Eberflus at all. I mean, I know Matt's a nice guy, and I actually did talk to him on his first day. That one time we were up at the behind the Walter Payton Center. Chatted with him, so I did talk to him once one-on-one, but you don't really get that opportunity anymore to know them. So anyway, so I guess part of my answer, one reason is Dave, because I think he's a good guy, and I enjoyed covering him, but also by default, because now we just don't get to know the guys, to know the coaches. I don't anyway. Possibly it's me. Maybe you guys were partying with the guy for all I know. I don't know. But for me, it was very difficult. I found it very difficult. So I don't really it's hard to answer that question because I don't know. I didn't get to know the coaches. I do know I kind of felt worse for Nagy, because I think he'll do well in his second run. I just thought he was he's in the right spot at the wrong time, I think, in Chicago. And I just liked him.
What's your point?
Johns, you were definitely partying with Mark Trestman.
Oh, legendary parties with Mark Trestman. To your point, Mark, like one reason I think like Vic Fangio became so, let's say, endearing a little bit is, well, beyond his football success, is because he let us in a little bit, right?
Yes.
Like he talked baseball with us before and after his press conference,
like nobody else. I mean, the only other guy, believe it or not, speaking of Ben Johnson, was John Shoup, who's a big White Sox fan, and he's kind of like Johnson's mentor, I guess.
They go all the way back to North
Carolina.
They go back,
and so if I think of a coach who really kind of engaged us in other things besides football, I think is Shoup, because he was a Sox fan. But you're right, Fangio was great talking about predicting. He was in Houston, they won, and then the Cubs, they're going to win. But what happened?
He comes in with his hole-in-one ball.
What's that?
He comes in with his hole-in-one. Like,
Oh, that was great.
It's such a human moment. Like, all guys can relate to that.
And he'd make predictions. Then you call him on, hey, what happened to the Cubs against the Dodgers in the playoff? Oh, I didn't realize that the termites would eat their bats or something. I can't remember what he said. Like, he was just funny. He was hey, you'll never. I could talk all day about Vic Fangio. And to a more actual point that I made, he's the one guy who has been, I think it's not coincidental, he's the one guy who's been most unaffected by by the dysfunction at Halas Hall, and it makes sense. Vic's his own guy. He's the old school sweats guy. He's just he's very confident in what he's done. He's got the best resume. He was totally unaffected, and he's the only hire they've made since I've been covering at least in the second time since 2009. He's the only guy at Halas Hall who has not been who's been the best version of himself, the actual real version that you expected when he walked in. Nobody else, from John Fox to Trestman to Eberflus to any of them, from coordinator on up, almost even Adam Gase, who got a job out of it. I still insist wasn't really, he was good, but not great. Every other coach from coordinator up has not been the best version of themselves, and in some cases the worst version of themselves at Halas Hall. And that goes to the huge question with Ben Johnson is, can he beat that? And I think the indications are, when you see the influence he's had already in lighting a fire under Ryan Poles and getting the offensive line taken care of and getting much better offensive linemen than he did in his first 3 years in free agency. I think you've seen that Ben Johnson's had that positive effect. And like I always say, I was kind of kidding at the time, but now I say it in seriousness, that he has to change Halas Hall before Halas Hall changes him. And Ben Johnson, because I've seen enough evidence that it does change you. And Ben Johnson, a younger guy, much the polar opposite, I guess, in one respect, age-wise, of Fangio, shows every indication that he'll be able to do that. And it helps to be the right guy at the right time, too. Having Caleb Williams to work with instead of Mitch Trubisky.
So I want to ask you a serious follow-up on that, but before, back to Fangio real quick. I have to say, I did some investigative reporting on this, though, and I'm pretty sure the whole baseball thing is a bit, because I'm not doubting that he loves baseball, but when I was at the Super Bowl, I overheard some Eagles writers, chopping it up about the Phillies with them. So I asked our guys at PHLY, hey, does he talk about the Phillies a lot in his press conferences? And you're like, yeah. It's like every week there's like a Phillies update. So then, another one of our markets is Denver. So I go to our guys at DMVR. I was like, hey, when he was in Denver, did he just like bring up the Rockies every week in press conferences? Yep. Huge Rockies fan. So I think I uncovered that wherever he goes, that's his thing. He's
a baseball fan.
I'm a Cubs guy. Well, I'm a Rockies guy. I'm a Phillies guy now.
I don't think he's just playing to the crowd. I don't think he came off as a Cub fan, like, per se. I think he was optimistic about the Cubs. So I see what you're saying there. But Vic Vic and I are the same, basically the same age. He might be 6 months older than me. But he is just a great sports fan. I remember one of my favorite stories that really tells a lot about him is, again, at this time, we didn't get a lot of it. Our only interactions were basically at the press conferences. That's the only way we get to know coaches. I was covering the Bulls one night against like the 76ers, and I was doing the scrum with Ben Brown. I think it was Ben Brown. Was that the coach? Anyway, I can't remember. But anyway, so I'm covering I'm covering the game, and at halftime, a guy taps me on the shoulder, and it's Vic, who I really didn't know that well. He actually came down from wherever he was at the game. He was there to see, I think, is Ben Brown, was he the coach of the Sixers at the time? Was that the guy? Anyway, he was he was a friend of his and was in for the game. And apparently in that scrum with him, I was looking right at, sometimes I'm trying to hear what the coach is saying, and I'm looking away. And when I was looking away, I was looking right at Vic and didn't recognize him. Because I'm just always focused on the event at the time, but also because Vic wasn't in his football. I wasn't in a football mode. But anyway, he made the point of coming down at halftime, tapping me on the shoulder and chatting for a little bit at halftime of the Bulls Sixers game. And just that he was there, he's just a good fan. So anyway, I guess my point is, Vic's a really great guy. Super happy for him that he won a Super Bowl. Not that he needed that validation. I know he said that he didn't, but whether he needed it or not, I'm glad he got it. Let's put it that way for his career. But also that he's a good sports fan and likes all the teams. Big fan of Philly, the coaches there and stuff like that. And talk about favorite coaches. By far, he would be by far and away number one on my list of all the coaches I've dealt with.
Brett Brown would be the Sixers coach. Brett
there
Brown.
It is. Okay.
Brett.
Okay. Brett Brown, right? That was Vic's guy. He knew him, and that's why he was there. But also because he's not just a Philly guy, but just a good sports fan.
Joe Madden, World Series Cubs coach, manager, was also Vic's guy. They went back to their
right. Well, I mean,
Pennsylvania
it's funny.
days.
Yeah. I was one of the things I wanted to do. One of my bucket list things actually is I want to take a trip across the country without using an interstate highway. In other words, I want to go on like 2-lane roads and go through small towns and stuff like that. And so I actually started mapping out the trip. This was a couple of years ago, even before I knew I was not going to be doing this. And I was mapping out the trip, and I got to the point where two of my stops were Dunmore, Pennsylvania, and Hazleton, Pennsylvania. Those are hometowns of Joe Madden and Vic Fangio. They're really close to each other. So I made sure, just because I like those guys, that I just wanted to, I was stopping in like Lewiston, Maine, the site of the Cassius Clay Liston fight, and Woodstock, and just kind of cool things in the country. And those were two of my stops, just because I like both those guys.
You did something coming back from, was it the Super Bowl that we covered in New Orleans together, or was it just like a Saints game down there? Didn't you take, like, I was always envious of this. Didn't you take the train home
I took the
from
train
New Orleans?
twice.
Like,
I took
I
it
just think
once.
it's a cool
I
experience.
love the train. Yeah, I love the train. I'm looking for one thing. I was always looking for a reason to take the train from like California because that's like 2 days. No, from New Orleans twice. I took that. Once was the Senior Bowl in
Senior
Mobile,
Bowl.
and then the other thing was like an NBA All-Star game. The one that was supposed to be in Charlotte, I think, that got moved because of some like bathroom law or something like that thing. But any political thing. But anyway, yeah, and I loved it. I loved the train. And I remember I was taking pictures. I think I was even posting them.
You were.
Not usually my gig, but I was posting them, actually getting reaction. It was kind of fun. It was like I might do that again, like take that trip across the country and just like post, do like a live thing, a live blog. Maybe I could do something like that or something. But anyway, I remember getting a good reaction to like pictures of stuff like that, like upside down Confederate flags that look kind of curious to me and things like that. But that was fun. It was like an 18-hour trip. The only bad part was it was in February both times. One was maybe late January, whenever the Senior Bowl is, and it's and the way the trip starts at 1:30. So by the time you're not too far out of the station, it's dark. So most of your trip, it's dark, and then by the time it's morning, you're near Chicago. So it wasn't the scenic trip, but I love taking the train. Yeah, I can't wait to do that again.
You know, Potsy. By the way, Potsy, as we mentioned earlier before we brought you on, markpotash.net is where he's already written a couple things. But one of the things you put in there that I actually remembered, I remembered it because I remember when you did it, it was like it was crazy to me, but also really cool. But remind me, because I think you went from the Super Bowl in New York out west. You covered like multiple Hawks games,
Yeah. Oh
Bulls
yeah.
game there. Like, what was the itinerary again? Because
Yeah, I
like
did that a
super
few years.
crazy.
That was like from when I got back into reporting. I was on this copy desk, sports copy desk, for like 8 years until 2009, and then so from 2009 to like till COVID almost, or even past that, I had a great gig at the Sun Times as a kind of a fill-in guy, home and road, not only just home games, but also taking road trips and stuff. And I was, my point in that story was that was actually the debut story on my website, was that I just to make the point that the thing I loved most was the grind. I loved grinding, and that was the best thing I did. Frankly, I'm not afraid to say that. And that was the Super Bowl in New York on Sunday night, and I had to be in LA for the Blackhawks morning skate against the Kings on Monday morning. And so it's more logistics than anything else, because you just get a plane. If you can find a plane, and going west is much easier. And I remember the funny thing was, I can't remember what I was doing, but I was looking at some pictures on my phone, and I have a picture that's like time stamped at like 1:30 in the morning, of a picture leaving the Super Bowl at the Meadowlands, a picture of the aftermath of all the confetti and blah blah blah, at like 1 o'clock in the morning or something. And then I have a picture that's timestamped 9:30 the same morning at the Blackhawks morning skate. I'm a nerd. I just think that's kind of cool.
Oh, it's
I'm great for
so
doing that. It was fun.
you must have been on the first flight out of New York City.
Yeah, it's a
The
6-hour
following
flight.
morning,
Yeah.
6-hour flight, but with the time change, you get
And that
3
was
hours, and so it made it work.
It did work. It did work. And I think I covered the Hawks in LA. I covered the Hawks in Anaheim, and then I went to Phoenix, and then I came back, and the Bulls were playing the Lakers, and I covered the Bulls and the Lakers. And then I went out. I remember the fun part of that. I went to Santa Anita Racetrack because Mike Tice, who was Bears offensive coordinator, and Joel Quenneville, the coach of the Blackhawks, owned a horse named Midnight Hawk that was really making some waves as like a potential Kentucky Derby horse. It was really interesting. And the horse was racing. First two races was racing at Santa Anita. So I actually went out there. I love horse racing. And so I went out to Santa Anita, and unfortunately, and it was going to write about it and try and get those guys if the horse won, but he finished third. Midnight Hawk finished third, and that was that. But then I went back to LA for the Bulls and the Lakers, and that was so. Anyway, I like that grind, and I remember doing it. I did once. I went from might have been the one in Phoenix and Glendale to Minnesota for a Hawks game. But the thing was, a couple of years later, I covered the Super Bowl in in San Francisco at Levi Stadium and did the same thing. I covered a Bulls game in Charlotte, and I'll just tell you, going east is so much harder. I didn't get
Oh
there
yeah.
until I missed the shoot around, and I didn't get there just before Fred Hoiberg's pregame press conference at like 5:30 or whatever. But it was so much easier going, because of the time change. Obviously, it was so much easier going west than going east. So, but yeah, really enjoyed that part of it. Not to belabor this point, but I remember I was just thinking the best time was like I was covering a Bulls game in Indianapolis, and they're an hour ahead of us, but they're really not that far from us. They're still almost as far west as us. So I was able to cover that and get like a 6 o'clock flight in Indy to spring training, and made Dale Swaim's early press conference in Mesa or whatever before that. But that was because it's like my flight was actually like 5 a.m. Chicago time, 3 a.m. maybe out so you had time. So always going west was better. So yeah, but anyway, thanks for bringing that up, because I love that. That was frankly the best part of my job. Was grinding, because it was also I was also helping guys out, my teammates. And I'm as you talk to some guys, I'm not always the best teammate, but in that case I was. So
You were a good teammate for me. Mark and I go.
I don't know what changed. But I actually, frankly, I do know what changed. I got older and a little crankier and a little more fatigued, and didn't want to do the same kind of work at 65 or 64 that I did at 54. And that definitely, that's interesting. That's something that I will say personally, that is something I never really accounted for. You don't account for getting old. I never thought about retiring. In fact, I did spend 9 years on the copy desk, and it was a really bad time. It was for like, in broadcasting, it's like when you get cut. Those guys just get let go for no reason. That's an even much crazier business than ours. But for me, it was like getting kind of what I considered a demotion off the Bears beat. And when I got back in 2009-10, I promised myself I will not be bitter about this. I will not, I'll just forget it. It's done. It's over. But I did that. But what I didn't realize was that was from age 41 to 50, and those were prime years of energy. And I did not have, especially after 2019, I kind of wore myself out. In fact, I got shingles. I was so wore out that I was never the same. And so I regretted those 9 years, because they cost me high energy years with a lot of those are prime years for a sports writer, when you have all sorts of information, you have all sorts of experience, and yet you still have all the energy. And so I could have not done that. So frankly, if I have any advice, cherish the time these days for you guys that you're in your 40s and late 30s, 40s, whatever it is, and have a lot of energy, because at least for me, it doesn't last forever.
Can you believe we're about 15 years removed? Like, well, this summer, from going from Nashville to Vancouver to San Jose to Philadelphia. Looking back at that point in my career, if you're a Bears fan listening now and you're from England or something, like, that was the Blackhawks Stanley Cup run in 2010, and like I was in my late 20s, so I had like boundless energy at that point for the job. But looking back, like, that grind, you have to like embrace that. The sleepless nights, writing in airports, taking that 35 minutes on the plane to write, to get your thoughts in order. But that was just, it was so fun. You didn't know it at the time, but we were covering, Mark, because you were with me every step of the way, like a special team. And I still like keep some of those moments in mind, like just in terms of whether it's leadership, the ability of some of these players to rise in key moments in the most strenuous of situations. Like, I still hold those with me today. But like, can you believe it's been 15 years already? Since that run?
10 years since the last one. Yeah, that was memorable. It's funny. I covered 3 of the Bulls' 6 clinchers, but I'm telling you that I think I talk about the one that meant the most, or one I remember the most, is when the Blackhawks clinched Game 6 in Philly. That ended a 49-year drought, and so that I thought that was like monumental. And I think my sidebar that night was Marian Hossa, and I really admired Hossa. in my business, every people who know me know this. I admire. The only thing I ask is that you acknowledge reality. And I realize you want to throw people, whether it's coaches, players, whatever. I realize you don't want to throw your teammate under the bus or whatever. I get that, but at least acknowledge reality. And Marian Hossa was really good about that, because he was a big time scorer before he got to the Blackhawks, and he wasn't scoring like he was. And I remember during that playoff run, asking him about that, and it's so great when a guy will just acknowledge reality. He says, "Yeah, I'm pushing too." He acknowledged it, and I just for that, just not just for that moment, but just in general, Hossa was just a great guy. So I remember doing that on the ice, and that's another thing, is that was the one Hawks that was a Hawks moment that I actually saw in person, because it was an overtime game. So we stayed in the press box, as opposed to 2013, when I remember, like, with 4 minutes left, taking an elevator with I was with Jeremy Roenick, taking an elevator down to the press room. The Hawks were going to lose and face Game 7, and everything, 17 seconds, one of the great moments in Chicago sports, happened while I was in the press room with a lot of other people, but not upstairs. So I can't really include that, because I didn't see it in person. I've seen it many times since, but it was that was always that weird thing with the tape delays, or with delays of the feed in the press room, but anyway, 2010, yeah, it was that was if certainly one of the key highlights for me, if not the top one, even though I'm a much bigger basketball fan or baseball fan than I was hockey. But that was just a great moment for the Hawks. First time in 49 years.
I remember, vividly, like the moment that they scored the winner, when Kane scored the winner. I was standing up, packing up to go to the locker room area downstairs, because that's where we would work. Like, here's like behind the scenes.
Right. Yes.
A lot of our time to meet deadline is we would leave the press box and go down to the press room, where you're watching just like everybody else on television. But I stayed later than a lot of other writers, and I was up there with Tim Sassone and Barry Rosner.
Yeah.
And they were typing on deadline, and I was standing, packing up, and Kane shoots. He starts celebrating. And I remember turning to them as he's racing towards Anthony Niemi, and the bench starts clearing. I'm like, holy shit, guys, they just won. I remember saying that to them in the moment, and everybody pops up, and just the flurry that happens afterwards in that fact, writing a deadline, the energy you have in that moment, going on the ice, chasing down Patrick Kane, who's got his family all over him, and Jonathan Toews with his family out there, Dave Bolin, just certain memories that stick with you as a sports writer.
Great. It was great to be there. That was one of those events. It was great to be there.
Potsy, I can, because I was along for the 2013 ride, and I remember being in LA with you in Detroit, and like I could always tell, just like as a friend, you enjoyed covering hockey. Like there was always that, I don't know why. Like it's just I could always tell, like you enjoyed, even when you're back at the cup would end, and then you'd be like at training camp a few weeks later in Bourbonnais, and you really enjoyed covering hockey.
I did, and it's kind of funny, like I'd covered so I was a huge Blackhawks fan when I was growing up. I'm 66 now, and so I was a bit, it was in the Bobby Hull, Stan Mikita, the heart of the Bobby Hull, Stan Mikita era. So I was a huge Hawks fan like everybody else, and then kind of lost it when Bobby Hull left, and after '73 when they went to the final, Stanley Cup final. But I was not into hockey. I mean, I covered some hockey with the Hawks. I covered when they were in the playoffs in '96, but really wasn't. I was in that kind of part of that fan malaise in the early 2000s when they were building this team, but not really paying much attention to it. And so I wasn't really a huge hockey fan, but I got back into it, and it was fun to be a part of it. I remember when Mark Lazarus came on board at the Sun-Times, he was covering Notre Dame, and he emailed me, asked me if I wanted to, because he knew that I'd helped out in 2010. I think I also covered like a couple games in 2011. Against the Canucks. And so he emailed me and he asked me, can you help out on the Hawks again? And I emailed him right back. I said, I will, but only if if I'm all the way in the deep end. I said, I don't want to dip my toes in the water. I want to be at every practice. I want to be at every morning skate, every shooter, every morning skate, every game, home and road. I want to be totally into it. That's the only way I could do it, was by immersing myself in hockey. And so it worked out that I was able to do that. And I did it again in 14 and 15 and 16 and 17, even the years they didn't win. And that was the best thing. But for me, I had to do that because if you don't, hockey's a difficult sport to learn. In fact, that was frankly one of my disappointments in myself, was all that hockey I covered. And it was more than I ever thought when I went over. did this press pass project that I didn't realize. I used to get press because I wasn't a regular. I had to get a press pass every time I covered an event, and so I have literally over 100 of them, and I covered all this hockey, but yet I never became fluent in hockey. It's like learning a language. It's so much easier when you're younger than when you're older, and it was a disappointment to me after that thing was over that I really didn't understand the game. But to your point, Adam, I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed covering the Hawks, and I'll be honest, all the teams I've covered, and I think of all the teams, all the championship teams we've had, even though the Bears Super Bowl team, people would put that on top. My favorite team was those Hawks teams because I just feel like they had something special. I think they had something that you don't see in championship teams, which is kind of a vulnerability, but yet an ability to kind of turn it on when they have to. And they had an ability to reel a team in. They had that. I love this. I always have these Hawks stats. My favorite stat on the Hawks is in like the first 4 games of a series through the whole run, they were like a 500 team. In games 5 and 6, they were 32-5. They turned it on when they had to. They never backed into a game 7. The only game 7s they came from behind. So they never really, except for one time when they lost. Adam, you and I were talking about this against game 5 against Vancouver in 2010. That's the only time they've lost a game where they could have clinched it. It was like an abstract kind of thing about them that they were special that we'll never see again. And they had a great leadership group too. They had a leadership group that you will not see. You talk about the Bears. It was like the opposite of what the Bears were last year, where they thought they kind of had a leadership group, but really just had a bunch of nice guys who were voted leaders. No, the Hawks had a leadership group with Jonathan Taves and Brent Seabrook and Patrick Sharp and Hosa and that group. And that's something you will also never see again. So I just thought that was a special team. So that's why, and in a long-winded way to answer your question, that's why I enjoy the hockey so much, because I thought they were so unique. And I wrote that when I kind of did a story on when Joel Quenneville took the Florida job, that was kind of the end of the era for the Hawks thing is over. I said, they may win the Stanley Cup again. I'm sure they will. And they may even win 3 in a 6 or 7 year period. It will never be like it was. That was a really special team that I think now that it's been 10 years, I think people are going to start kind of, thinking about again and thinking about how great but that was a special team. That was a special championship team, even more special than the Jordan-led Bulls championship teams.
You and I have covered a couple Super Bowls together. Now the Bears weren't in those Super Bowls, but
yeah,
you ever catch yourself thinking like what it would be like if the Bears were here? Like you go to these Super Bowl weeks and you're trying to make as many Chicago connections as you can because that's where we're from. You look for those stories, you look for those angles. We've done it from Phoenix. We did it when we were covering the Super Bowl in New York. But
I think Matt Nagy's had his fill of that Chicago contingent coming.
Adam Hoge.
That better not. That happens. I'll bet it won't be quite as smooth as it's been. I think he's done with that.
To his credit, he's kind of made it a bit.
No, it's good. No, and he's a super nice guy, right? And he's such a good. That's a guy I really hope gets another chance and succeeds because he's such a good guy. You're right. He's very good natured about it.
I think the first year he was like a little annoyed that we were all there because he hadn't won it yet, and then he won it, right? And then he won it again, and so now it's kind of like, yeah, I'm back here. What's up, Chicago? That's good for him.
Yeah.
But what do you think that would be like? Like, what do you think? Like, especially in this day and age.
I'll be honest. I think it would be like, for me, it'd be like overwhelming. The Bears in a Super Bowl. My gosh. I'm so desperate for the Bears to cover a winning team. That's kind of one of the disappointments of this whole scenario for me. Is that I had been saying the last couple of years that once I reach retirement age, I said even if I could afford to retire, which I can't, I said I would still do this. Because I think the Bears are going to be good in the upcoming years. This is even before Ben Johnson. I thought they were heading in the right direction even before that, and with polls. And I said I want to cover a winning team, and not to get off the Super Bowl subject, but in 2010 when the Bears went to the playoffs, I was there, but only part time because I was covering Notre Dame at the time. I'd just gotten off the desk, so I really wasn't there every day. In the 17 seasons of the 28 or whatever overall that I've covered the Bears in some form or fashion since 95. In fact, I just was going through some old clips and saw one from 95, covering Friday practices, whatever. I've covered the Bears since 95, but in 17 seasons where I've been there every day at every press conference, all that, the Bears have made the playoffs once, because I don't include the 2020. That was a COVID season, I think, right? And we really weren't even in the building. So, but I also don't count it because to me, that wasn't a playoff team. And I think we all knew that. But anyway, so really, for all intents and purposes, I've covered one. And man, that's tough. How many? Think about, I can't remember. I was talking to Jeff Joni called me. I was talking to him about it, about how, like, I covered I'm sorry if I'm getting off subject here, but I covered that 2014 team. You guys were around for that, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
I covered the 24, which is kind of the low point for a lot of people, because it was one of those. It was the ultimate death march for a head coach, because we all knew after those two games against the Patriots and Packers that it was going to be over. It was a disappointing team. It was the suddenness of the end of the Lovey defense. Yeah, whatever. That's like the low point. Well, this year, frankly, for me, that 10-game, that was the dread of waiting in that right, where we wait to get into the locker, any locker room, home or road. The dread I felt there was 10 times what it was in 2014. I mean, there was nothing to ask. There was at a certain point, there was nothing to ask. It was just, we were just going through the motions of doing this, and it was the worst. And that wasn't just like a one-off season. I mean, maybe to that extent, but in general, that's how it's gone for the Bears. We spend a lot of our time just, lamenting difficult, bad times. And so I really wanted. It would have been nice, and I still hope to get into it. I don't know if I will be able to, but if not, it'll be tough, because I really think they're headed for at least a better run than they've had, and it's a low bar. They haven't even had 3 playoff seasons in a row since '88. But anyway, I guess my answer is, I want a Super Bowl would be great, but the big events are always kind of overwhelming to me, and so. So that might end up not being as much fun, but the Bears being in the Super Bowl, yes, just having the Bears have a winning team where you talk to a guy, he's happy to see you. I always say, I've been reflecting on my career a lot, and again, sorry for getting off on a tangent, but I've been reflecting on my career a lot, and just people talking to people and stuff. And like, the best part of one of the best times of my life was when I was covering high school sports, especially in the Chicago Public League, but all over the area, because it was so great to talk to people who wanted to talk to you. That was in the 80s and 90s, before the internet, where the only pub anybody got was in the newspaper, especially if you were a high school basketball player. And you'd love to see the Sun-Times coming your way. They loved to talk to you. And the public league kids were fantastic. Those guys were always good. But anyway, wouldn't it be nice to talk? Isn't it nice to talk to people who want to talk to you, and they're not dreading the questions you're going to ask about the coach being fired, or why the offense is so bad, even though they just hired this offense coordinator, all these negative things. That's really, I know you're asking about the Super Bowl, which would be great. I'd like to see the Bears be a winning team. So even if it's not me, for everybody on the beat, so we get to have some fun conversations and just a fun time covering the beat from day to day, as opposed to this. I will always say beat's working for a living. It always did. But still, in those moments, I don't know how you guys feel, but for me, I thought it was really difficult. I found that very difficult, not only from my job standpoint, from more than anything else, from an interpersonal standpoint, where it's just tougher to talk to guys, even the good guys. It's like, Kevin Byard, what a great guy, but it's like, got to be wearing on him, Cole Kmet, like Cole's the one guy where I didn't really show it. He was the best to me, or is the best, because he totally, he felt our pain, which I think that's another thing. You talk about, that's another thing besides acknowledging reality. Feel our pain. That's all I ask. Just feel our pain. And he was really good at that, being a Chicago guy. But for a lot of guys, for everyone else, the good guys, and some over the years not so good, tough to go to them during tough times. So that's what I look forward to, is just the Bears, for everybody, for just the Bears being good. So it's so much more fun to cover.
Without a doubt, it wears on you. Just, I don't care what you're doing. When you're around people that don't really want to see you for a long time, it wears on you, without a doubt. Potsy, this has been great. I mean, just to wrap this up, obviously we got, kind of the hardcore, diehard Bears fans watching this show. They all know your work. Just what message do you want to leave with them? And, it does not sound like you're done or want to be done. And I hope that we're seeing you at Hallis Hall too, but just how can they continue to follow your work, and what do you want to tell them?
My message would be simple. Thank you. Because the passion of Bears fan, the passion of Chicago. Hey, I'm a Chicago sports nerd. I from the 60s and 70s, and I was a guy calling sports talk shows, um, and just a really passionate fan. And that's why that's why I did what I did. So, in like a lot of I felt like I was trying to ask questions that I thought me as a fan would want to ask, and so I felt like I was representing them. Even we all do. We all represent the fans, but even to me, more just the real passion of it. So thank you for your passion. I love it. I think it's always good. I love that people even lose their minds because of their passion, because it's still just sports. And the great thing about sports is we're just kind of to what we were just talking about is in sports, when you do this, even the bad memories become good memories. 10 years from now, we're going to be laughing about covering the 2014 Bears or the 2024 Bears. We will be, because we'll be older, and it's a bad memory that just turns into a good memory because it's just still sports. So anyway, I say thanks to I love the passion of, and I guess every fan base has passionate fans. So I don't want to do the Chicago fans are the best thing, but I love the passion of the fans. I think it's great. It fuels me. I think it fuels all of us. It makes our jobs, especially our jobs, your jobs. You guys are very fortunate on the Bears beat, because the Bears beat, I've covered every beat in town. The Bears beat is the one in town where no matter how bad the Bears are, everybody still loves them and still cherishes them and is passionate about them. And so that makes our jobs worthwhile. And so so my message would just be simple. Thank you. And yeah, you can reach me at markpotash.net. It's a fledgling website at this time. I'm totally not wired for that kind of thing. I could use you guys to kind of promote me and stuff like that, or some kind of expert. So I'm not really good. So it's just starting out, but I'm hoping that I'm having so much fun. I just like writing. I like writing, and I like writing about sports. So I'll do it for a while, and then if it catches on, fine. But it'll be a lot better as I get used to it. But it's just an outlet to write about sports and my career, and just my perspective from 45 years of covering sports in Chicago and the US, I guess. But anyway, so yeah, that's where hopefully you'll still be able to see me. I'd still love to cover the Bears if I get a chance. And again, thanks for asking that question, because it's a great chance to say to the people who made my job what it is, thank you very much.
Well, thank you. I'm sure that's what they're all saying back right now.
He's not going anywhere. He's already, he's very active on Twitter, Mark. You can't give it up yet.
Yeah, man. Twitter, it's a little different. It's a little different dynamic in Twitter when you're kind of on your own. I don't want to be I said it's a very fine line between kind of being the in the kind of in the game expert and then to gadfly, So
Come on.
I don't want to just be
I'm
that
kind of
guy
looking forward to it, honestly.
taking pot shots at people.
That should have been your podcast years ago. Pot shots.
Yeah, right. Well, yeah, it should have been my column. But yeah, I'm not sure how that's going to work out, to be honest. So the Twitter thing is kind of in limbo at this point, because I don't know how it's going to come across when I'm not working. So we'll see. But anyway, I'm still going to write, still going to be active, and well, we'll see. We'll see what happens during football season, because right now we're in the interim. This is a period where I'm generally not busy on football anyway, so I'm not feeling it. But boy, when that football starts, then we'll see what's going to happen, because there'll be days like on Monday when I never wanted to write. I won't miss that, but on Sunday and during when the press conference with Caleb Williams, man, I'm gonna be missing that a lot. So that'll be tough. But anyway, we'll see what happens. But hopefully, I'd like to stay in it.
Yeah, thank you so much. We'll be reading everything you put up there whenever you put it up there, markpotash.net. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for not forgetting me. I appreciate it.
Oh, means a lot. We're not forgetting. Potsy's gonna be on CHGO next week too, so we're not letting him go anywhere. We're gonna keep pushing this. Yeah,
thanks, guys. Always good to talk to you.
All right, there he is, Mark Potash. Fun conversation. I hope Bears fans really enjoyed that, even as we went off on some tangents, because he's got stories. He's got plenty of stories, and he's been a amazing member of the Bears beat for a long time now. I'm gonna miss the hell out of him. I hope he still ends up in House Hall, because even if it's just him storming out of press conferences, I'm gonna miss it. It's the best.
The memories, the good memories.
And we're gonna miss some questions in there too, man. Like he's always been willing to go all in.
If he gives us permission, maybe you could put it on your show. Like this interaction between him and Aaron Cromer from years ago.
Yeah.
This is still saved. We have video of this.
Pat Finley sent it to me last week.
Yeah, it still exists. We're not going to say how we got it or where we got it from, but we have it of this off the cuff before the press conference begins interaction between him and Aaron Cromer, which we still laugh about amongst the writers, but it is a classic interaction between coach and reporter that really I don't think has really been publicly shared.
That's a good teaser. Honestly, he should put that on his website.
Yeah.
And then we share it. So markpotash.net. We got to get out of here. Make sure you're following us on Twitter at Adam Hoge, at Adam Jahns, hogeandjahns.com for all the merch. Hopefully everybody enjoyed that conversation. And we'll just tease this going in the weekend. We're both headed down to the owners' meetings in Florida. And that's going to be going on early part of next week. We'll have at least 2 episodes for you. Big episodes. Excited about it.
If you've been following us long enough, I think you know what this means and what's coming.
Absolutely. So little teaser for you there, and just make sure you don't miss next week's show. So if you're not already, it's a good reason to subscribe to the YouTube channel, hit that like button, subscribe to our podcast. Both is ideal. Even if you only consume one more over the other, it helps support us, helps support the show. So please go ahead and do that. Don't miss anything next week. Hit those notifications, have them set up. It's going to be a big week. We usually hear from everyone from the chairman down to the head coach, the big 4 with the Chicago Bears. So I assume there'll be some news out of there too. And looking forward to all of that down in Florida. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Talk to you next week.
See ya.